giving me the go-ahead. Yes, I'd like to call the meeting to order of the Plan Commission for July 1st, 2025. The first thing we'll do is stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Could we have a roll call, please?
Holtkamp.
Here.
Gormanson.
Here.
Moody. Odine.
Here.
Prendergast. Here. Woolsey.
Here.
Next, the approval of the minutes from the July 3rd Plan Commission meeting.
So moved. Second.
We have a first and a second. Any comments about the minutes? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Approved. Now it's time for public comments. If anyone in the audience has anything they'd like to say. Seeing none, we can move on to the one ordinance and resolution in front of us, which is regarding the final plat for the preserve, a 24-unit twin home development on Powell Avenue between Woodridge Drive and East Woodridge Drive. Looks like we've got a bit of a report.
Absolutely. Well, good evening, Mrs. Chair and members of the Commission. I am Harley Melhorn, Senior Planner. Before you tonight is the Preserve Final Plat. The proposed Final Plat is for the Preserve, which is located on the north side of Powell Avenue between Woodridge and Oak Ridge Drives, and consists of 7.28 acres. The property was annexed into the city in May and went before the Park Board on June 18th, where they recommended unanimously to collect a fee in lieu of land for park dedication. The subdivision consists of 12 twin home buildings with 24 units. All but 4 of the units are served off of a new road coming off of Powell, with the other 4 being served off of Woodridge Drive. Stormwater is to be contained in 2 outlots dedicated to the city as part of the platting process. Municipal code requires final plats to be evaluated upon the following criteria on screen. Staff analysis on each of the conditions can be found within the meeting packet. City staff have examined each of the following conditions and found there to be no concerns. Therefore, staff recommends the Commission forward the resolution approving the Preserve Final Plat with a favorable recommendation. With that, I conclude my presentation and I turn it back to you, Mrs. Chair. Thank you.
Thanks. Does anyone have any questions for Harley?
What's the distance of the new road from the other 2 roads, just out of curiosity?
I don't have that number exactly. Do you happen to recall?
Please.
Sure, please.
Yes, he's coming up.
It's fine. I just was wondering, with the having that another intersection on that road, if it's going to be an issue.
I would, Matt Heeb, ACA Engineering in Hudson. I would estimate that you're approximately 300 feet or so from each, give or take.
Thank you.
And I will say, Todd Nikolewski, our city engineer, evaluated this with the speed limit being considered from a turning perspective for conflict and found it to be done.
Any other questions? If not, I've got one. You mentioned that the Park Board is going to approve collecting a fee instead of the usual green space requirements. And I think I saw something in the packet about an enhanced crossing to Collins Park. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? How will it be enhanced, and can you show me where it might be? Would it be across, like, right next to the drive, or is that yet not decided?
Yes, Chair. I can show you that. So the crossing will approximately cross where this pointer is right here, directly across Powell. The enhancements, the specific design is yet to be decided, but likely it will have some sort of illumination element to flash when it's being occupied by a pedestrian crossing the road, just to aid in vehicles being able to stop in time and seeing that.
Okay,
Likely some striping and signage as well, potentially.
good. Any other questions? With that, I'll take a motion.
I move for the resolution regarding the final plat for the preserve.
Second.
Yes, and just to remind everyone, this is to forward this to the city council for approval. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And then we've got some reports from Ms. Peterson. First is the regional housing update. Yes. Thank you, Ms. Reed.
Okay, thank you, and good evening. Amy Peterson, Community Development Director. So tonight, I just wanted to give you some updates on housing data that Harley and I went to a regional housing conference, and Professor Kurt Paulson was in attendance and provided updates. He's actually from the Madison campus. So he provided a bunch of regional data on housing, which we hadn't seen quite like this before, so I wanted to be able to bring it to you, not only for your understanding as you approve things in the community, but also when you're out there talking to members of the community to be able to have this knowledge in the back of your mind as well. So I will jump through here. I do want to let you know that these slides are directly from him. So if you have fine questions on the data, we might not be able to answer that for you tonight, but we might have to circle back with him and get some information. But the first part, the first point is that regional housing or housing markets tend to be regional, not local. I think a lot of times we think about them as the city's housing market, but because the job market is regional, the housing market follows it. So while we can affect it some ways, we do not have. And you'll see that through the rest of this presentation, that there are many, many factors that are affecting the housing market today. And we can move a little here and we can move a little there to have some effects, but we are not totally in control. The land use decisions, however, obviously are within the city's control, and that's, your role here. So over the medium to long term, the price level of housing in the region basically reflects the fundamentals of supply and demand in our capitalist society, right? So everything from land costs, construction costs, but also jobs, income, demographics, and such. So if we look at housing affordability, then we're really looking at the puzzle pieces, right? Supply on one side, demand on the other. On the supply side, you've got the units and the prices, and on the demand side, you've got the household and the incomes. So we'll kind of dive into these two sides and take a look at some of the data as we walk through here. So let's start on the demand side with the households. This can be anything from the number, size, accessibility needs, and then of course the income, which is the workforce, and the AMI, or the area median income. So let's start with some of the demographics and job income. So this is for Wisconsin, and you can see in the blue on the right that the household growth is growing faster at 0.7% than the housing units that are growing at 0.46%. And you can see this data covers 2010 to 2023. So, right, obviously the households that need homes are growing faster than the units that are out there. And here, another demographic and income slide showing that of that 0.7% household growth, it's basically in the 1 and 2 person households. So the average household size has declined over time, and it makes the demand for these smaller households and smaller units and different housing types that are needed. And if you think about it, I mean, we always talk about people living longer, right? Aging in place. It's less expensive and more comfortable. People are staying in their homes longer than they ever used to. So taking a look at Wisconsin's population specifically, there's less growth or even some loss in the 0 to 54 age group, with most of the growth coming on in the 55 plus and up brackets, which is something we've heard for a number of years for now, right? The boomers are moving on up. But if we look nationally, it's not just the boomers, but we're coming right behind them, right? We've got millennials in a peak there, and we also have Gen Z in a smaller peak. It's not as wide or as broad of a peak as the boomers were, but still in those high population numbers coming right behind. So let's switch over to the supply side of things, talking about units and prices. And here again, just to reiterate what I had said originally, right? Many of the inputs to the housing supply and demand are national or even international in scale and scope, and they're affected by federal policy. So these are outside of the control of our government, but they significantly impact the financial viability of housing projects for local governments. So this is national data showing single-family construction costs up over 41% from 2020 to 2025. And if we jump to the multifamily, it's very similar, right? That's a pretty big increase. Again, this is the national level. And if we look then at the subdivision activity, so this is Wisconsin, right? The construction and subdivision activity has not recovered from the Great Recession or even pre-recession times. So we're making gains, especially in the multifamily market, but the single family market and the platted lots, the blue line, are still far behind 2020 levels. So we're just not building as much or platting as much as we used to. And so this is Wisconsin building permits and subdivision summary, right? So in basically some more data off the premise from the last slide, right? So this shows the average annual total of building permits per 1,000 in population in Wisconsin for the years shown. And again, shows that we're increasing from 2.56 to 3.67, but we're still a far cry from the 6.78 that we saw from 1994 to 2004.
May I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Can you go back
Yep.
one slide, please? So 2005 to 2008 housing crisis, it's not in this, doesn't appear to, there appear to be a few missing years in this.
There does appear to be a few missing years.
Oh, well, if you don't know anything about that, it's just
So now let
obvious.
me think. My first recollection, and Harley, you can think about this too, is that he might have omitted that because it would have skewed the data.
Mhm.
I think
I believe the
I
intent,
remember that correctly.
my recollection is that he wanted to talk about pre and post
Housing crisis.
housing crisis and draw a distinction between the two, and then the three kind of like pre-baseline, post immediate crash, and then now the upswing recovery, but it's not quite to the baseline, I think is what he was getting out the slide.
That makes sense. Thank you.
And may I ask another question about a slide one or two back when it talked about, that was the other one, where you have this cost increase, multiple factors, or what would you say is due to that?
Can you point me to which one you were
I'm
thinking
sorry, the
about?
next one, that one there.
This one?
Where you have construction costs at 41.5% increase. Was it elaborated on? I suppose it's multiple factors, but was there anything that just stood out as the main? Was it supply of lumber? Is it land? Is it?
Yeah, I suspect, as you do, it was a number of factors. I don't remember one sticking out.
It looks like it happened after COVID.
I think materials was the number one thing that he highlighted is the cost of raw material due to the labor shortages overseas where we import a lot of our raw construction materials from.
Right.
There was almost a 1-to-1 increase between material cost and construction cost, I recall on the slide.
So supply chain related kind of things, okay. Thank you.
Harley has a much better memory than I do.
Well, it takes a village.
Okay, jump back ahead. Making the switch then to construction employment, it is finally recovering over the past 15 years. You can see we're getting back to levels closer to 2006, 2008, as far as the workers actually building the homes, right? So here the blue line is the national trend and the red line is Wisconsin trend for building units per capita since the late 1990s. And again, you can see that Wisconsin's just building fewer units per capita than the US is so far. And so here's some regional and state data showing the underproduction of housing units from the aspect of growth in households versus growth in housing units. So specifically, you can see St. Croix County highlighted, showing the underproduction of just over 500 units from 2006 to 2023, and other areas through the state as well. And then if we switch to a workforce housing and job perspective, most job centers in the county have more jobs than housing units. And a slide to remind you of our aging housing stock, which I know we've talked about before, but most of the units, and this is looks national to me, that most of the units being built prior to 1980. So if we start to bring it all together on housing affordability, so typically, right, we talk about a 5% vacancy rate is deemed healthy. The rental rate has been hanging around 5% for the state since about 2014. That's the blue line, right? And the owner occupied has really never made it to 3%. So our vacancy rate tracks similar to the rest of the state for owner occupied. It's been a very tight owner occupied housing market in the state of Wisconsin. And we're also seeing significant housing prices with a statewide increase over 50% since 2019.
I assume that's not adjusted for inflation?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I don't see a footnote to tell
Thank
us.
you.
And so then this is the affordability ratio on the ownership side, which is the change between the median household income and the median sales price between 2013 and 2023. And you can see highlighted in yellow, St. Croix County is up 40%. But interestingly enough, from a rent perspective, that ratio has actually dropped by almost 11%.
And that's due to supply, perhaps.
I believe so, yeah. Yeah.
But go back, sorry.
Oh,
Looks like, Pierce County's gone up though. So
It has.
half the city, I mean, yeah, interesting.
yes, good catch.
Yeah.
Right.
So this data was where he talked a little bit about profit margins, because everyone always thinks, well, if it's costing so much more, then the developer should make less money, right, to make the housing affordable. But actually, and we know this as city staff from working with the developers within the city, the profit margin just isn't there. Especially when you're trying to find people to invest, right? They're really going to be looking to see solid gains on their investment as they go. So this data that he was showing was just showing a 9% profit on this piece. So that wraps up the data from Professor Paulson portion of the presentation. Were there any other questions or thoughts on that portion? Otherwise, I did have one more slide. It's been a housing month, I guess, because the St. Croix housing study is also wrapping up and in completion. So we were able to attend kind of a roadshow that they were starting to put together. And actually, they're going to be in River Falls on July 24th. It's a 7:30 to 9:30 a.m. presentation. And you can register at the St. Croix County EDC website if you'd like to participate in that. And I just put some statistics down from the study just to kind of give you a taste of where they're at. So occupied housing units in St. Croix County tracks out at 23% rental, 77% owner occupied, and that's been pretty steady since 2000. The rental vacancy is about 3.2% with an owner vacancy of 0.6%, which tracks from what we've seen with our housing study as well. And so similar to what we've seen from our housing study, 33% of the residents live and work in St. Croix County, with 67% of them leaving the county for work. And then you can see a spelling error actually, but the 2013 median sale price of $175,000 on a home to the 2023 median sale price at $366,000. And the rent comparison as well. Median rent for 2013 at just over $1,000, and the 2023 median rent just over $1,500. So if you're interested in this, again, check out the roadshow that's coming to town on July 24th. So with that, I think Harley's up. He's taken some data and from the city perspective to supplement this. So.
All right. Good evening again. Well, now that we've evaluated the national and regional trends, let's look at some River Falls specific data. On screen as a reminder is the national cost to construct change. Not so as important as the index or specific numbers is the geometry of the line. So just capture into memory kind of the geometry of that line. This right here is the average estimated cost to construct in River Falls for single family units. This is charted from 2014 to 2024. This data is almost perfectly mirrored to that of the national data. Though thankfully the magnitude of the increase is a little bit less than the national average cost increase, the geometry and the trends is uncanny. This reflects the fact that housing is a regional, national, and even international issue, not necessarily just local. That being said, the raw numerical increase is less than that of the national data, and the trends in our number of units is on a very good trajectory, as we'll touch on in a bit. We will zoom in a bit on some of those critical temporal sections to dissect what's going on, and then talk about some permit numbers within the city of River Falls for single-family units, and then we'll finish off by talking about some, hopefully shortly forthcoming, code updates and what specifically those might contain. As a reminder, the national data showed a 41.5% increase in single-family construction costs between January of 2020 and January of 2024, with a rapid increase between 2020 and 2022 before it leveled off into somewhat of a stable inflationary increase. The River Falls data shows the biggest increase in the highlighted segment, that being from 2020 to 2022, with a 27% increase. If this trend were to have continued, the ultimate magnitude of increase would have eclipsed that of the national average. However, As illustrated in the graphic showing the 2020 to 2024 data point connection, this average cost decreased between 2022 and 2024, ultimately leveling out to a 14% increase from the 2020 to 2024 data point. I do want to highlight though, this data is actually not reflective or indicative of an actual decrease in ultimate construction cost, but rather it's reflective of the year-to-year variability in the construction type within River Falls. Notably, in 2024, we almost exclusively had twin homes. And you imagine that counts as a single-family unit, but the cost to construct is not as high as traditional single family. A lot is a lot. You know, from a single family lot's a single family lot. But that being said, taken on a whole, if this were to be considered the entire structure, the trend would keep going, which is what this graph illustrates. The true trend line of the cost to construct over the evaluated period clearly shows a substantial increase, both from 2014 to 2024, but more specifically from that 2020 point to the 2024 point trending into the future. Though things like macroeconomic factors, interest rates, material costs might come down a bit, it's unlikely that we'll ever make it below that 2020 baseline again. Thankfully, this is the good news, despite the increase in cost over time, the number of permits, both as visualized as permits per 1,000 population and raw permit numbers, and really quickly, I will interpret this data. So the blue line is the permits, and the green dashed line is the average construction cost. The most notable thing about this chart, two things: the raw permit counts on the left, but just to interpret that into the numbers that we talked about earlier, as a reminder, the pre-construction, or rather pre-pandemic and pre-Great Recession numbers for Wisconsin was 6.7 permits per person. I'm happy to say in 2024, River Falls peaked at 6.3 permits per person. So we're actually, on a hyper-local scale, relatively competitive with where the pre-financial crisis baseline was. That being said, I do want to reiterate that these lines are not correlated data. So we don't actually expect to see, if anything, we expect to see an inverse connection between them, meaning as cost goes up, permit numbers should theoretically go down. But that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing some baseline activity, and then you see where that big hike was. We had a bit of a divot, but again, that could just be pandemic constraints due to labor and material availability. When materials were ultimately available, we see a massive upswing, ultimately to the highest number we've had, to my knowledge, in our recorded history of permits. Thus, this shows that the River Falls market is desirable and feasible even with the economic constraints that we're seeing industry-wide. The rise in permits despite the parallel spike in construction cost is a testament to the demand seen in western Wisconsin and more specifically the River Falls market. Now, with all of those national and local trends identified, I'd like to touch on how we are using this data to inform the implementation of the policy of the comp plan. The comp plan identified many of the same issues and trends as Amy outlined in Professor Peterson's comments today, presentation today. The comp plan offers guidance in what the city can do to address what is within our power as a local authority. That being ensuring the zoning code is consistent with our policy vision for increased density and efficient use of infrastructure to aid in the availability and affordability of units. With an increase in supply of high quality and livable units, especially including the missing middle housing typology, market factors indicate that this may help to address affordability by addressing demand. As a specific example, an increase in allowable by right density on a per development basis would theoretically allow fixed cost to be spread out over more units, thus decreasing the ultimate cost on the home buyer or renter. To this end, there are a number of specifics being evaluated in the shortly forthcoming code updates, which include a quantitative density increase across all residential zoning districts, including modifying the density recommendations in the comprehensive plans to more closely align with the comp plan's vision. Secondly, the allowance of more missing middle housing in our R1 and R2 districts, as well as reducing the minimum lot size for single-family residential development. We're seeing a common trend of small lot, large house. This is the development paradigm over the last, pretty much since the pandemic. We've seen lots getting smaller and the houses either staying the same or getting bigger. The creation of an accessory dwelling unit or ADU ordinance as is contemplated by our comp plan, as well as evaluating the open space requirement for multifamily in favor of an amenity and open space choice-based system that can accommodate more flexible development while still delivering the River Falls quality of life. We're going to be looking at multifamily parking standards to ensure that land is used efficiently while not encouraging superfluous pavement on lots, that we're not overparked, but we're still addressing the residents' needs. And finally, that those miscellaneous changes to our definition chapter, as well as some cleanups of our code just to make administration easier. More specific language will come hopefully very soon to this commission. We don't have a particular date yet, but we are actively working on it internally, and hopefully soon it will come before this commission for review. With that, that's all I have on the River Falls data. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Be happy to answer any questions on this, or together we can answer any questions on the presentation writ large.
I have just a quick one. Could you please explain for those who might be watching this presentation exactly what missing middle housing entails?
Absolutely. So often when we talk about housing, we talk about either the idea of this white picket fence neighborhood or large garden style apartments. The missing middle is what lies in between. Those 2, 3, 4, and even 5 unit smaller scale developments that can actually fit within the urban mesh that we have. A great example is, I'm very proud to be in the neighborhood just north of this building. We have a number of this not so missing middle, because it is actually present in some of our older housing stock, of triplexes and quadplexes right into the urban mesh of these small lot single family houses. Often will be anybody in River Falls will be walking down a street and unknowingly they'll be passing a duplex or a triplex. These missing middle housing typologies are typically very well integrated. They typically have very little impact on the character of a neighborhood. If anything, they preserve it. And it's an essential part of the toolkit going forward to effectively use and reuse our housing stock.
Thank you. Any other questions for Harvey?
The ADU again, can you just elaborate on that, what the possible changes are with that?
Absolutely, Commissioner. Currently, our zoning code does not have an allowance for more than 1 unit per single family lot. We allow for duplexes in particular cases, but what an ADU is it's a subordinate accessory dwelling unit. So that can be detached or attached. It's effectively another unit on a single family lot that in character is subordinate to the principal building. That means things like being smaller in scale or of the same size, typically being tucked behind or beside the building, and not having any entrance off of the main road that the main house is addressed off of.
So in the future, you're looking at more of an allowance for that, or more margin to be able to do that.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That gave us a lot to think about.
Yes.
Appreciate it. And next, Ms. Peterson, do you have a planning update, or was that included in this?
It is included. However, I did want to point out that we have filled the Natural Resources Coordinator position within the Conservation and Parks Division. Levi Myers is an internal candidate, and he will be moving over to Community Development from the Water Wastewater Division department. So other than that, there's a lot going on. If you have any questions on the report, I'm happy to answer those.
Any questions? With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.
So